today, because I feel like most of my reviews are not so glowing. And I don't understand what's wrong. I mean, maybe I'm just pickier than I thought, but the sheer volume of books I read, I should have a higher percentage of books that I've liked. Maybe I'm just picking bad books. Maybe I'm picking books by authors who need more experience. Maybe I'm just picking the wrong subjects. I don't know, but that's what makes today so special, because I get to talk about a book that I thoroughly enjoyed. So, is That's Not What Happened by Kody Keplinger. Keplinger? I should probably look that up. If you don't know who she is, let me remind you of a little movie called The Duff. I think it's maybe 10 years old now. It's Designated Ugly Fat Friend, starring Mae Whitman. If you don't know who Mae Whitman is, let me remind you of another movie called Hope Floats with Sandra Bullock. And Mae Whitman was her super bratty daughter, and she did amazing in it, so that's why she stuck out for me. If you need something a little bit more recent, maybe not as relevant because we're adults, but the Tinkerbell movies, she is the voice of Tinkerbell. Anywho, that is Kody Keplinger. She has probably 4 or 5 novels. I think I've read 1, maybe 2, plus like a short story. I did not love The Duff as much as I thought I would, but this book I thought was excellent. It is about a school shooting, so if that is not your cup of tea, here's your time to leave, because I do not want to upset anybody. I will say I didn't feel like this was a particularly explicit book. It did not get graphic, but for some people that's still enough, just knowing that it is a school shooting book. Maybe I need help, which I'm sure many of you would agree with. You'd say, yes, Beth, you need to go to the funny farm. But school shootings have always intrigued me. I think part of it is that Columbine happened during my formative years. And the other is that I'm a consummate student of human nature, and I just need to know. I want to understand what makes people tick. I rarely pass up an opportunity to read a story that dives into one of those events. I do have Hate List by Jennifer Brown on my TBR, but I've also read This Is Where It Ends by Marika Nijkamp. Pardon me for butchering the name. I was not nearly as impressed by This Is Where It Ends as I'd wanted to be. I think it's because I couldn't fully get behind the reasoning for the school shooting, but we're not talking about that book today. We are talking about That's Not What Happened. And what I loved so much about this book was how it paid homage to basically everybody involved while completely ignoring the shooter. Keplinger never even named the shooter. And I just thought that was so great because she was not glorifying the person who did it. It was not about them at all. It was about the effect or the impact that this decision had on other people. So there we go. And it wasn't just a focus, as I said, on one person. But what I love so much about this book is that it essentially pays homage to every character in the book. It's not just the main character's story. It is everybody's story. From the people who died to the survivors. It is about, this is not what happened. You think you know, but you have no idea. Now, before I get into any of this, I have to tell you my biggest problem with the book. And that is Lee, who is the narrator, that is her asexuality. This could just come from my ignorance, my lack of understanding as to what asexuality really is. My understanding is that asexuality is you just kind of have no sexual drive, no sexual preference. But Lee does have crushes on boys. And so her asexuality identification is driven more by the fact that she has no sexual inclination, not that she has no romantic inclination. And to me, sex and romance don't have to go hand in hand. You can find people attractive, you can have crushes on people, but not be driven by sex. And that seems to be why she considers herself asexual, is because she doesn't want to have sex. And there is one character in particular named Miles who she has a crush on, but she refuses to pursue anything because she does not want to have sex with him. And it just, I don't think it was effectively portrayed. And in some ways, I wonder if it's just Keplinger's attempt to have an underrepresented voice, or it's her attempt to avoid a romance. Because we all know YA, there has to be a romance. Or there has to be a romance. I don't think you have to have a romance in YA. It's just the norm. I mean, I would breathe a sigh of relief to find a book that focuses on a story, on a plot, without a romance. Like, again, Lee can have a crush on this boy, but she doesn't have to go anywhere with it. Like, because the story is not about her romance. The story is about her as a school shooting survivor, as all these other people who either died or survived. So that was my issue, is I just thought it was unnecessary. The book would have been better if it had been left out, because it did not factor into being a target by the school shooter. It did not factor into her being ostracized by her community. I guess I want to say in some sense it did have to do with her social standing, but I mean, I think her social standing was more that she's not a people person, versus people don't want to be around her, or she doesn't want to be friends with other people because she doesn't think that they will accept her sexual choice. Let's move on from that. The driving factor behind this novel is Lee's best friend, Sarah, who, if you know anything about Columbine, you are familiar with Rachel, who was killed for her faith. So, there is this assumption that Sarah was killed because she was a Christian and because she admitted to believe in God. Spoiler, right? Big spoiler right off the bat. Sarah was not the person heard to be proclaiming her faith. A huge part of me was like, just spit it out already. What happened in that bathroom? Because Lee and Sarah were in the bathroom together. Lee was there when Sarah died. I just wanted to know how Sarah died, and Lee did not. But it took 3/4 of the novel to finally get to the truth, which is Sarah is the girl with the cross necklace. So there's this huge deal made about this cross necklace because Sarah's wearing one in her school picture. So despite the fact that the cross necklace discovered in the bathroom was not the same one Sarah was wearing, everybody attributes this to being her property. So you're just like, well, early on, we know it's not her necklace. So we're like, why didn't you say anything? You know, like, what really happened? How did this necklace and this profession of faith get attributed to Sarah? And it was not until very late in the novel did we learn it belonged to somebody else who had been in the bathroom, who was also a survivor. But because she had tried to tell people it was her necklace, and that she was the one who said, yes, I believe in God, even though she's a very unlikely person to be a Christian, to be a believer, nobody believed her. And so she was ostracized, and you know, her family, they were all targeted, and they eventually were run out of town. So that's your big spoiler, people. And to add on to the spoiler, so the deal is Lee and Sarah had been in the bathroom, and there were 2 other girls in the bathroom, 2 of their 6 survivors. And they're in there, and Sarah is freaking out over Hickey because she has been dating a boy she's not allowed to be dating just because she's not allowed to be dating, period. And so the Christian, Ashley, walks out, says some pretty harsh things to her, and then she leaves, and then the other girl is like the bad girl, and her name is Kelly. And Kelly is the owner of this necklace. It just has sentimental value to her. Anyways, she leaves the bathroom, and then she comes back in, and she trips. Like, she has seen the shooter. She runs back in, and she's telling the girls, you gotta hide. She trips in her haste. Her necklace breaks and falls off. And so when the shooter comes in, he has already shot Ashley. So when he comes in and he sees this necklace, he asks Kelly about it. She admits it. But Ashley, who has been shot, who is traumatized, who is in shock, knowing Sarah is in there, thinks it is Sarah who is proclaiming her faith. The shooter, he goes further into the bathroom. I'm not quite clear about the stalls. In my bathroom, it was not hard to really see over them, or I'm not quite sure just how it all works out, but he's shooting into the stalls, and he shoots over one, and the bullet hits Sarah, and that's how she dies. There was this huge build-up to Sarah, so for me, it was a little anticlimactic that it was essentially a lucky shot that he killed her. Obviously, Lee was with her. Sarah dies in Lee's arms, so the whole time, you're like, well, why doesn't Lee speak up about the fact that it was not Sarah's necklace? Why did she not clear the air to help Kelly out? And that was something else I thought was incredibly well done. Because, obviously, I've never been in a situation like this. Something super traumatic. But after the shooting, Lee sequesters herself. She quarantines herself. She does not see people. Ashley has been taken to the hospital, and she has begun telling people that Sarah is the one who proclaimed her faith and owns this necklace. So the word is getting out with Lee not even being aware of it. And so by the time she does learn of it, it really is this situation of, how do I tell people that it's wrong? Like, the moment is never right. Or when she goes to Sarah's house to tell her parents and set the record straight, how do you break a parent's heart like that? My parents would be incredibly proud to know that I would die for my faith. And then if they lost me, that's something that they can hold on to. So how could Lee burst that bubble? How could she take away the one thing the parents have to hold on to? So I really liked how the whole time I'm thinking, open your mouth. It's not that hard. Why didn't you say something? We see the situation and we're like, I get it. It's not as easy as it sounds just to say, hey, that's not the true story. Because as we see with Kelly, who she's another driving factor. Because the book opens with, I think it's the 3rd anniversary of the shooting. And we know that there are 6 survivors. Only 3 of them are still around. And then we learn about kind of where the other 2 are. But the 6th one is a mystery. And so along with the mystery of what is the true story behind Sarah, it is what happened to Kelly. Why is she not included in the survivors' text message group? Like, she's included in the group as a whole, but she's not acknowledged. Where did she go? So I just really loved how it's all kind of straightforward, but at the same time, there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot that we're like, give me answers, and that is what keeps the story going. We do eventually learn that Kelly, we learn who Kelly is, we learn what her story was, and then we learn that her attempts to tell the truth got her run out of town. She eventually changes her name, and she does her best to move on, and she really wants nothing to do with any of it. You can see by Kelly's story why at some point Lee wouldn't want to speak the truth, because she wouldn't want to go through the same torment that Kelly went through. The book, if you can't tell, is setting the record straight. And I thought it was cute how the book, the book is really a book in of itself. It's not a book for us, but it's basically Lee has written a book telling the truth, setting the story straight. What happens is their survivors are Lee, Denny, Miles, Edie? Sorry, I didn't remember. Ashley and Kelly. None of them were really friends before, but this event obviously bound them all together. And Denny is a black kid who is also blind, and he is trying to get scholarships to college. And of course, it's like, he kind of has three things going for him to get a scholarship. But he doesn't really want to rely on all those. And he especially does not want to rely on being a survivor. Because it's going through that experience was more than what people think. So he writes this kind of alternative version to what it means to being a survivor of a school shooting. But he wants Lee to read it, to kind of give him some feedback and let him know, is it something that he really should send to the scholarship committee. And this letter gets Lee thinking. And it also convicts her because of the whole Sarah story. Because what people think Sarah did is not what Sarah did. Who they think she is not who she was. And so Lee decides to write this book, which is her story, and also have all of the other survivors write their own letters to be included in the book. And then she pays homage to all the people who did die. And I thought that is what made this book so impactful. Because it's one thing to say, oh, so-and-so died. But for me, I'd be like, well, who was so-and-so? Why should I care that so-and-so died? So I really loved that Keplinger fleshed out the people who died and made me mourn the fact that they were dead. And I loved how each survivor had a story that made them human beings, that made them not people who should be up here on pedestals because they survived a school shooting, but was like, hey, you know what, like, there's something going behind the scenes that we need to see that makes them so much more personable. So the first person that she contacts is Ashley, who was the super Christian from the bathroom who had made Sarah feel bad about the hickey. And so Ashley's story is one of, I was that stereotypical mean Christian because I was unhappy about myself. And then when I got shot, so she gets shot and she becomes paralyzed, and she's like, this is basically the best thing that could have happened to me because it made me reevaluate myself, reevaluate my life, figure out where I wanted to go, because the whole problem was beforehand, I felt like I believed in God. I trusted in what He wanted for me, yet He wasn't saying anything. All these other people seemed to know where they were going, what they wanted to do with their life, and so, but I didn't, and I should, because I believed God had a plan. And so then the school shooting happened, and she's like, you know what? Through that, I figured out what God wanted for me. But we also learn that she is the one who spread the rumor. And it's wonderful because you want to hate her for starting the problem, right? But at the same time, she didn't know that she was telling a lie. So then, how can Lee go and say, you didn't hear what you thought you heard? Because hearing Sarah proclaim her faith helped keep Ashley above water during her own trials and tribulations. So it's the same thing with the parents, where how do you pop that bubble? How do you tell someone that the one ray of hope that they had that kept them going throughout this time of unrest wasn't real. So it was really great how there's so many pushes and pulls. I loved and hated. So eventually Lee does go to Sarah's parents, and she tells them the truth, and they don't believe her. And so, I loved the strength it took Lee to do that. I liked their reaction because it was realistic. You want them to accept it just because we know Lee is telling the truth, but it's been 3 years. And the other thing that spurs Lee on to telling the truth and to writing this book is Sarah's parents are writing a Sarah McHale book. Not a tell-all, but look, this is who our daughter was, and this is how she has inspired so many people. And Lee, she's just like, no, that is not the truth. I have to do something that tells the truth, especially because the parents will not believe me. But what I hated, and I'm trying to figure out if it's okay for me to hate this, or if it is just one more stereotype, it is that Keplinger made the church out to be the villain. Which on one hand, I like, because you need something to get under your skin. But on the other hand, I really disliked how the pastor was brought into this, because obviously the parents go to their pastor to say, look, this is what's going on with us, which is fine. But then he took it upon himself he came to Lee and was like, look, I know you're lying. Let's talk about it. Like, let's get to the root of the problem of why you would say something like this. And then when she refuses to retract, he takes it upon himself to essentially tell his entire congregation, under the guise of praying for Lee, that she is telling lies. And then this causes problems for Lee, and the same problems that had happened with Kelly. People start to target her. I had a really big issue with that, because now it's the church's fault. And I really hate how everybody thinks that Christians are terrible people. I do know that there are some churches out there, some pastors out there that have had it wrong, but I wish that Keplinger had made the villain someone else, or she could still have made the church the villain, just in a different way. I really don't like how she made the pastor out to be that kind of a person that would share personal business that doesn't need to be shared. I think it would have been better if Lee had told Ashley, who then told it to her sister, who was still in school, and then the sister let word out, or that maybe it was the parents. The parents had told other people, and then those people had gotten the word out. Like, I still think Lee could have been persecuted without it being the church's fault. It could have been teenagers who think that, who are acting out with their righteous anger. Like, I think it's still plausible for a Christian to behave in the wrong way just because they think they're doing the right thing, but to just say, well, the pastor is going to tell you you're lying. He's not even going to consider that maybe you're telling the truth. And then he's going to set his whole congregation against you. I really hate this word, but that triggers me, all right? Because I don't feel like that's the kind of Christian I am. And most of my Christian friends, I don't feel like they're that way. I think my pastor is an incredibly godly man who would not do that. So, and there's got to be, I feel like there's more good Christians than there are bad Christians. But we're not going to get into that soapbox. Let's move on. We have talked about Lee. We have talked about Denny. We have talked about Ashley. Now let's talk about Eden. Eden's cousin Rosie was also Denny's best friend, but Rosie was one of the victims. By and large, the victims were from a computer class that Denny and Rosie had been in. I kind of wish we got an explanation as to why that was the class that was chosen. We don't, but there you go. So Rosie and Eden weren't particularly close. There's actually a great deal of animosity between them. Rosie was more of a golden child. But in the aftermath of the shooting, so Lee, Denny, and Miles had been freshmen. Eden, a junior, senior, Ashley, a junior or senior. So by the point the book opens, they have both graduated. Ashley has started a family. Eden is in college. And she has made something of a name for herself as a speaker against guns and gun violence, which makes sense. But what we've learned is that it all happened by happenstance. She is not a particularly vocal person. She's very quiet and shy, but her roommate had invited her to a protest, and she went. She had her picture taken, and obviously people found her name, did their research, highlighted her, and she was thrust into this limelight. And she found that she liked it because she finally felt like she was doing something to make her family proud. And something that, this sounds terrible, kind of eclipsed Rosie. So then when she started drinking and having all these issues and anxieties regarding speaking in public, she didn't feel like she could tell anybody because she did not want to lose, not the status, because it's not necessarily about having status, but the status in her family's eyes, that she is finally somebody to be proud of. Lee knows none of this, but she visits Eden at college, and she sees Eden has a problem. She learns from Eden's roommate and girlfriend that Eden has a problem. And then, so it's through a conversation that they have, and, Lee's asking Eden to write a letter that Eden has decided she does need to seek help. She needs to talk to her family. And so I just thought that was another really great point where we see a survivor seem to rise above and do all of these great things, but she didn't necessarily do it by choice. It happened accidentally. And so then, again, what do you do with your own problems? So I thought it was really great. Let's move on to Miles. Now, Miles, I don't really know how to feel about Miles, because I had a thought that he was going to be one way, and then it went into another direction, which was still okay. But I was sort of hoping that my guess was going to be right, because it was fall sort of in line with the whole Ashley thing, where you have one perception. So what's going to happen when that perception is totally wrong and could make everybody hate you? The thing with Miles is he was the guy, if we had a superlative, he would be the guy most likely to be the shooter, He was just a troublemaker. He was not the greatest kid, and he is Lee's neighbor, but she never would have had anything to do with him had it not been for the school shooting. But he does not want to write a letter for Lee's project. And so I'm beginning to think maybe he was in it with the shooter. And maybe he changed his mind at the last minute. And he became a hero because Ashley, after she had been shot, says, well, then Miles covered me. He protected me. But in actuality, Miles was not in on the shooting. He had, okay, how do I put this? So, Miles was getting into a lot of trouble. He had been suspended. It was his first day back, and he had one teacher who believed in him. And so somebody in class was saying stuff to Miles, and he eventually lost his temper. And this teacher who has been trying so hard is like, well, you know what, like, we gotta go outside and talk about this. I think maybe they were going to the principal. I don't exactly remember what was happening, but because of Miles' behavior, and which led to them being in the hallway, the teacher ends up getting shot. And so now Miles chickens out. He's like, I gotta get away from this guy. Which again, I'm trying to figure out how all this works. Like, because we don't get any explanation about the shooter. I mean, the most we get is that he was bullied, but we're not going to talk about that. Like, we're not going to go into that. There's more to it, but people are going to believe this, and so there it is. So I wish we had gotten more into the shooter's mindset as to really why he chose to do what he did, and then why he chose the people he chose. Like, why did he go to that computer classroom? Why did he go into the girls' bathroom? Why did he choose to shoot the teacher, but then he didn't shoot Miles? But again, nothing we can do about it now. Miles, in his attempts to get away, actually falls on Ashley, so it was all by accident. So he feels guilt over the fact that he got the teacher shot, and that he was not a hero. He was not protecting Ashley. He was actually trying to save his own skin. You know, I didn't mind the fact that Miles was ashamed of his actions during the shooting. That, you know, people were thinking something of him that wasn't true. Because that's what the whole book is about. That's not what happened. But I kind of wished we'd gotten that added layer of, well, Miles really was in on the shooting. That's why he's so ashamed. That's why he's so hesitant to be part of Lee's project, because he was part of the problem. He really wasn't part of the solution. I thought that would have made the book better, but whatever. I mean, in the end, Miles wasn't such a bad character. His motives, his secret really wasn't that throwaway. But let's get to Kelly. The deal with Kelly is she has dropped off the face of the earth, and it's basically because she's changed her name and has done everything she can to put this behind her. But Eden had run into Kelly during one of her speaking engagements, so she has the information, which Lee takes from her while she's passed out drunk, and then Lee is basically stalking Kelly to get Kelly to agree to this project, because she thinks, you know, this is what ran Kelly out of town, was that nobody was supporting her version of the truth. So now that somebody is wanting to support Kelly, Kelly will be on board, but Kelly will not respond. Eventually she does, but she's like, I want nothing to do with it. Like, it doesn't matter to me now. Nobody wanted to hear the truth then, so maybe you need to think about that. You need to think about, why are you trying to tell the truth? Like, is this about you, or is this about something else? I liked how, again, like, we're shedding new light on the situation. What are people's motives? And this is something that she also kind of comes to blows with Miles about, is because Miles is like, why are you doing this? Like, who is it for? Lee eventually says, you know what? They're right. And so she puts everything in Kelly's hands. She says, hey, Kelly, I will contact you one last time. Just meet with me. And then she hands over all the material to Kelly. And it's like, Kelly, this is your story. Do with it what you will. That's when we get Kelly's story about what really happened in the bathroom. And obviously because we have the book, we are led to believe that Kelly put it out there. And there's the end of the story. But as I said, there are, I think, 9 people who died. So we have 9 little vignettes about the people who died. And those, like, those plus the letter inserts, I thought really pushed this book over the edge from something typical to something special. And I loved that Keplinger explored or exploded the myth. You know, just like the girl from Columbine who died for her faith, that's all we see of her. In the shooters, we only see what has been given to us. But there's so much that's behind the scenes. What was Rachel's real faith? Did she live it out day to day? Or was there just this one moment? Not to say she didn't have real faith, but we live our faith out in different ways. Obviously, her faith was enough that she would die for it, but who was she really? Because she, just like Sarah was more than a good girl who went to church. She dated a boy behind her parents' back. She wore makeup that her parents wouldn't let her wear. She was not this saint that everybody thinks she is because of this cross necklace, because something Ashley heard and attributed to her. So I thought this book was fantastic. I would recommend it to anybody. Obviously, there are things that I would have done differently, but that's why we're different writers, because we have different perspectives, and that's what makes books so great. Because maybe I can write a book about a school shooting, and I will have a different perspective that can cause controversy. Let me know what you think. Let me know what some of your favorite controversial books are, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye!